Hi, everyone. Welcome. I hope you've all had the last half hour to have your shots of coffee so you're wide awake and excited to be here. My name is Bhakti Shringarpure, and I'm moderating this wonderful panel titled Siblings, Conflict, and Transformation. Very terrifying title here, especially if you have siblings and if you have issues with them, or in my case, I don't really, but now I'm wondering whether I do. So we have three incredible writers present here. I'm going to just very quickly, their bios are in the program, so you should definitely check them out and buy their books. But I will briefly say Janika Oza joins us from Canada, but by way of Uganda, Kenya, India, and her debut novel, History of Burning, is extraordinary, and you should definitely pick that up. And Hamza Koudri is here from Algeria. He also has a debut novel with a beautiful title, Sand Roses. And he is one of these unique new writers that is writing in English, but he's from Algeria, and which is we are usually used to seeing literature in Arabic or in French, and so he is paving some new paths, so you can hound him about it, as everyone seems to do at this festival, and you should also buy his novel. And we are so grateful to have Chigozie Obioma from joining us on Zoom here. It's a little, we're going to have our necks turning in weird ways, but thank you for being able to be here. We're sorry to not have you in person. And Chigozie has written 3 novels, and the one that I think is most pertinent for this is his first one, The Fisherman, which really looks at sibling relationships. And I just wanted to also very quickly, before I welcome them, say a tiny bit about the way in which they are treating siblings in each of their works. So in Janika's book spans a multi-generational story of migration, displacement, expulsion, tragedy, beauty, tenderness, all those things. But eventually, the half of the book is focused on 3 sisters who are, who remain in contact. Eventually, they also lose contact, but they're all in different places, and it's a struggle to connect. The 3 sisters struggle to connect as they also experience the loss of one of the siblings. So it's a very moving story, and there are no spoilers when I say that she leaves us very unhappy at the end, because it doesn't give us that precise satisfaction we want, because I guess that's life, and it's a wonderful, wonderful job. Chigozie Obioma's novel, The Fisherman, is the story of 5 siblings, and it's a family torn apart by a prophecy in this town, and by brothers who used to be very close, and then experience a lot of rupture, and experience again loss and tragedy, and actually a sort of intense violence as well. And Hamza, I would say, he's using siblings in a very different way. He has these kind of killer twin sisters who are out there. They're dancers, they're very passionate, they're very beautiful, and they play tricks in a way on the town in which they live. They take advantage of their resemblance, and they are also a very violent set of twins. And it's a thrilling, absolutely brilliant novel, and you should definitely get it. But it's a very different. It doesn't explore so much the relationship between the sisters, but more of uses them more as a ruse for the plot as it unfolds in Algeria in the 30s. Okay, so I'm going to start by asking you all just a very, very basic question. The relationship between siblings is very different. It's a very different kind of love, and it can also be a very different kind of jealousy. It can be a different kind of connection with each other, very different from how writers write about love. how writers write about desire, or how writers write about mothers and children, or fathers and their children. So how did you begin to articulate this very unique bond that only siblings can have? And I think it's a very difficult thing to articulate. So whoever wants to start can go for it.
Yeah, I can speak on that. First of all, thank you for the introduction, and it's really wonderful to be up here again. I am so fascinated by siblings. I think there is, as you say, a different kind of bond or love that happens between siblings. I know with my sibling in my real life, we have this kind of like, it feels like a telepathic connection, like we can meet eyes and know what the other is thinking. And I feel something that's so fascinating about siblings that is really useful when you're writing a book is a sibling can be this sort of like built-in ally. They are maybe one of the only people in the world who's had the same upbringing as you, the exact same set of parents or experiences. And so there's this sort of like, this inbuilt connection and understanding that I think is so powerful. And at the same time, that gives way to so much, like the possibility of betrayal between siblings, which is something that I'm exploring in my novel, is also, it's such ripe territory. And I think, too, something I was very interested in with A History of Burning was I was very interested in eldest siblings, like eldest daughter, eldest son, and the sort of different responsibilities that calls for, across different cultures and places and times. But, in this novel, I'm looking at this family who's comes from India to Kenya and then Uganda, and the novel begins with an eldest son he's not the oldest sibling, but he's the eldest son, and he has this sort of this responsibility to take care of his sisters and his mother in a way. And then throughout the novel, there are so many eldest daughters. I was really interested in that because I am an only daughter, and I think there is a very particular kind of responsibility put on eldest daughters or only daughters, and I think that's across many cultures, not just my own. And that's something that, that can be a very beautiful relationship and also can be something so fraught, which is, very ripe for writing a book.
Yeah, that's an excellent point about the burden on the eldest. And I wanted to segue then to Chigozie, whose novel, The Fisherman, is very much about that, very much about this elder son, the elder two boys actually, and the things that start to go awry because as the elder son, he is forced to receive a harder punishment. He is forced to make decisions that, are perhaps he's punching above his weight. So Chigozie, do you want to tell us a little about how you wrote Siblings?
Well, thank you everyone for coming. And, my wonderful friends, Hamza and, how do I say the name?
Janika,
that's right, yeah. And Bhakti, of course. So I feel like the elder, person here because I've written 3 novels, and I kind of envy both of you because I remember what it feels like, 2015. My interest in writing about writing in general, writing fiction really is that I'm interested in relationships. That's it. I feel like, some of us who are so-called literary writers, we like to pride ourselves as being people who write serious fiction. But there's something that we don't seem to quite get, which the Colin Hoovers of this world have kind of discovered. So when we write this serious fiction of ideas, and then we sell 10 copies, we begin to wonder why is Colin Hoover selling 1 million copies? Well, that's because they've actually figured out, romance writers, that what we're primarily interested in is relationships. And they write about not just relationships, but intimate relationships, you see. So So that's for me. So I'm interested in how people connect, how they disconnect, and sometimes how they reconnect. That is really what I try to explore in fiction. So here in The Fisherman, um, that dynamic plays out in a relationship between four brothers, as you said earlier. And what I just wanted to explore was what the bond was like. I wanted to create this entity and then test it, find a way to fracture it. So, what can fracture that bond between brothers that is very like it's blood deep, you see. So, you know, obviously I played with a couple ideas. Should they maybe be grown ups and then fall in love with the same woman? And then I realized that that idea has been overly done. And then eventually I stumbled upon the idea of the prophecy, you know, the spoken word that has impregnable power. So that's really it. I want to explore how relationships, how people connect,
Yeah,
how they disconnect, and sometimes how they try to reconnect.
wonderful. Thank you. Hamza, your stuff is different. Tell the audience why and also how you chose to.
It's the messed up
Right.
one, yeah. So, so I think I should start probably with a disclaimer that I absolutely have no right to be writing about sisters. Not only am I not a woman, but I don't even have sisters. I am the second of four brothers. So I should start with that before it is. And so, but I mean, and to be honest, when I was writing Sun Roses, I wasn't trying to write a book about sisters. I think the focus was on the dancers or this unique culture, and I wanted to sort of tell it from the point. It was very important to me to tell it from a point of view of these dancers, and I wanted those sort of two characters to be sisters because of the rest of the story. But I realized early on that I would have to look at sisterhood and the relationship, and I recognized that I am familiar with brothers, but also I see we're in a culture where you're also familiar with your aunts and your cousins, and so there's a lot of other sibling relationships that you observe. So the other sort of tricky thing about it is they are not only sisters, but they're twins. And also, it's one of those things that are overdone. But I was always obsessed with twins. I was crying when I was a kid that why didn't you have a twin brother? And so I had to write it. I had to get it out of my system and then move on. But but I think the other thing I was trying to explore is the similarities between what I'm already familiar with. So I think across genders, across cultures, there are some of the basic rules about the dynamics between siblings. Like I always say, rule number one is I get to beat up and bully my brother or sister. Nobody else gets to do that. And I think everybody can identify with that rule. And it's very much present between Salima and Fahima, the main characters in Sun Roses, because they didn't choose each other as sisters. They are these sort of relatives that were forced to be in that relationship. Nobody chose that. They are very different in terms of values, in terms of what they want out of this career. But they're forced to be together. And then their mother sort of not only does that, but does the worst thing any sort of sibling can have is she forces them to be one person. And so to the rest of the world, they are just one, but to themselves, they have to figure out who they are, outside of the
To avoid paperwork and taxes and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. For tax evasion, for, to make more money out of it. And so she forces them to just, work as one. But then to them, like each one is trying to be, who is that person going to be? Who's going to be the dominant sort of part of that personality? And then I think, as we go, I think they also, like in a lot of those relationships, your sibling is the one you trust if everything goes wrong. And they're in the city where there is a lot of violence, there is a lot of betrayal, there is a lot of there's a lot of actual attacks. And so they have to rely on one person. I think their sisters, each other is sort of the person they rely on.
Oh, thank you. In all of your novels, despite very different treatment of sibling relationships, these are worlds, these are universes in which it's not like this American hyper-expression where everybody's discussing every little thing and confiding in each other, or whatever this idea of talking through things, being close is being able to talk through things. But all the siblings in these novels are not talking through anything. They have secrets, yet they have a bond. They have a closeness, yet sometimes you read and you kind of worry that they're too distant. And there's this push and pull around closeness and distance, and a very stressful keeping of secrets from each other. And I just wanted you to, and I think that to me was the most unique thing, because the truth is we can say we're close to a sibling, but it's not the same as being close to like a best friend or your lover or something like that. And I just wanted to ask you to say more about this push-pull and the secrets between siblings and how you came to find the balance as you wrote. I don't know who wants to go first.
Can I go first? Just
Yeah,
to build
sure,
on what I
sure.
just said, I think, and that push and pull for me was more of where they come from opposite directions in terms of their values. And what I mean by that is they come to the city full of dreams. They want to succeed as dancers, but success means different things to each of them. So Salima is sort of like, the street smart. She just wants to collect money and go back to her home village and marry her betrothed fiance. So she's very practical about her dreams. And she doesn't trust anyone. She thinks everybody is sort of a little bit, she takes it out of her mother, everybody's out there sort of to harm them. And we have Fahima, who's almost like sort of the foolish one, but also like, the carefree. She wants, she doesn't want to make money and go back home. She wants to travel the world. She wants to meet a painter or a photographer to paint her and travel with that painting. And she has all of these dreams that she hears. And then she's the other sort of, she's the opposite of Salima in a way that, she trusts everyone and she's willing to share her secrets with a lot of people. And so that becomes the center of that sort of conflict between the two of them. But also throughout the novel, I think what we try to do is sort of to see them going in different directions. So that throughout the experiences, Fahima tries she learns, oh, okay, maybe I shouldn't be so trust because she has some bad experiences. And Salima sort of has the same experiences teach her something else. And so we see them sort of like maybe, I don't know if they're crossing paths or sort of like getting closer, but that sort of central value that separates them sort of becomes also their journey as they change throughout the novel.
Amazing.
Yeah, I think that's what's so interesting about siblings to me is it brings up this question of loyalty because, if you're my sibling, I think, well, you should be most loyal to me. We share blood, we share a worldview, but then sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes, your sister will be more loyal to the parents or to her partner, her lover. There's this sort of, again, it's that idea of loyalty and being able to betray that loyalty so easily and so painfully, I think, among siblings. And in my novel, these three sisters that Bhakti mentioned, the eldest sister, when she is in Uganda and she's a student, she's a student journalist, and she sort of becomes involved in this underground resistance. When Idi Amin is in power and starts this underground journal. And this is something that really calls into question that idea of loyalty because she doesn't tell her sisters, right? She doesn't tell anyone. And, for her, that's because of protection, right? She is loyal to her sisters. She loves them, but she loves them so much she wants to protect them. And so she won't tell them about this, dangerous thing that she's becoming involved in or creating. But her sisters, who are younger and look up to her, don't understand that, right? To them, it's a betrayal because how could you not tell us? You should be telling us everything, right? We're your sisters. And I think when I was writing those characters, like I could so deeply understand both sides of that. Loving someone so much that you want to protect them, and protecting them might mean betraying them.
Yeah.
And then also, on the other side, thinking, well, all I want is to know and to be in it with you, even if that hurts me or potentially hurts me.
Yeah, and I want to add that each sister carries a big secret, and it's almost sort of like no big deal. One of the sisters, for example, finds intimacy with a woman then goes on to be in a friendly but loveless marriage, and nobody ever talks about it, nobody ever hears about it. Another one has a child. We don't necessarily, sorry, we don't necessarily know anything about who that person she was with. So it's very interesting, and I think it's spellbinding. It's very gripping, of course, to read that. Sorry, Chigozie, we are.
Yeah, no, I love those ideas, especially how, Janika just described loyalty. That's very much what I try to explore in The Fisherman as well. But another thing that I actually do remember, what's funny is, I feel like that book is old now. I struggle sometimes to remember much of it. But one of the things I was thinking about, and that I actually have always done in subsequent works of fiction, especially long-form fiction, is that I'm always thinking of two things at the same time. So even though I was trying to explore the mystery of loyalty, of forced bonding, that Hamza talks about, nobody has to be born into nobody made the choice of being born into a family. I was also thinking in metaphorical terms, about what the family could represent in terms of my state of mind at the time. Because the novel was conceived in Cyprus, which in North Cyprus, where I was hustling at the time as a very young man, and I had almost nothing. But I was very much wondering why that country that was in the middle of a desert, has nothing, is in fact a kind of a pariah nation, had constant electricity and infrastructures that we didn't have in Nigeria. And I began to think of what might be the reason why Nigeria at the time wasn't what I hoped it would be. So the vision that actually came to me was using that family as a unit to think about what it means, what the country itself signifies, So the idea of these disparate units that were in these geographical location, a kind of a foreigner coming in and saying to them, almost like a prophecy, this is how you will be now, which is how Nigeria is formed, almost like the prophecy of a madman. So what people don't seem to understand, or very few people do, is the idea of the madman in the novel, even though it's instantiated in the person of Abulu, who is an actual corporeal character, is actually a sort of a metaphor. So if you are in Akure or Lagos or Ibadan in Nigeria, in any Yoruba-speaking area, and as we are gathered now, you have someone who barges in through the door and is screaming, and it's not and anybody who is unwelcome, basically. Yeah. So the instinctive response is to say that the person is a madman.
Right.
So that's actually what Abulu actually stands for.
Okay. Yeah. I think you're saying something bigger too. You're saying what I'm hearing is also that the family, the unit of the family, is the sort of first political unit also of society, that there are these allegorical connections.
Yes.
One has to see within family units, and what that means for nation, or or the inability to form nation. I don't know, do Hamza and Janika, do you want to say something about connecting these sort of family stories to the idea of nations that are about to be formed, or they are disintegrating, or there's some kind of, some symbolism, some allegory in there?
So I think the closest thing I can think of in terms of the link with sort of the political sort of arena at the time was more of the resistance, sort of the relation to the resistance. So these two sisters, at the beginning of the book, they kill a soldier in self-defense, and again that throws them into more complexity because they have to hide the body, and they find themselves drawn into sort of more and more violence, and then they find themselves at the heart of like a resistance movement. And again, it's one of those political choices that they didn't sort of necessarily even have the option to choose. They didn't have another option, but they're also engaged as sisters in that resistance. And I think the value of that is more, and I think sometimes we forget about that. They're not at that point. They're not thinking independence. They're not thinking, oh, we have to change the nation. They're thinking, oh, we have to get out of this crime that we just killed this French soldier. That's one way for us to survive, and because this is more an obstacle for their own success, and so they want to sort of. It's more. I don't know if it's selfish, but at one point, if they didn't have that experience, they wouldn't have been engaged so much at the political level. So it is coming from that sort of small unit.
Yeah, I mean, and the twins in this case, maybe more Salima, they do engage a sort of collective band of revolutionaries who are out there doing some damage to the French colonial army. So it's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think where my mind goes with that question is this book is so much about family separation and having to leave your family or leave your community or leave your homeland or various kinds of separation, being forced out, being exiled, and for many characters in the book that also comes with leaving your siblings and parents and whoever else, which is that is the nation state enacting violence, in this very intimate way, in the most intimate sphere, that of the family or the relationship between siblings, and sort of breaking them apart. And it happens in this book and in reality, over and over in so many ways. And there's one character in this novel, Rajni, who is born in Karachi before partition. And then her family is sort of going through partition, and she is the eldest daughter, the only daughter. She has 2 younger brothers, and her family sort of inadvertently, in order to protect her, they want her to leave. They want to send her off, get her married off to a man who lives in Uganda, as a way of getting her out of what is probably going to be a violent migration, which we know that it was the partition of India. And that is again like politics acting in this intimate family sphere, and I think as a writer and a person, what interests me in that is the intimacy, the intimate relationship, and how that would be felt, on the level of the body, for this young woman, and how what leaving her family, leaving her siblings would mean to her, and also how it feels to be the one left behind, and to kind of like, maybe take a lifetime to understand what that means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we forget, but I mean, the state constructs a family, whether it's through marriage contracts or laws about, gay marriage or interracial marriage, all those kinds of things. We forget the role that the nation state plays in constructing family relations, until it starts to rupture or unravel. Chigozie, do you want to comment on families, siblings, nation? I think your third novel perhaps deals a little bit with estranged siblings.
Yes, very much so. So the road to the country obviously is set in the 60s, which directly connects the unraveling of Nigeria as a political entity in the aftermath of independence in 1966. My dad used to make a joke, which I actually don't think is a joke, in fact. He would say that his parents were Nigerians, but they did not know that they were Nigerians. Nobody told them. They lived and died not knowing that they were Nigerians. Why is it so? Well, in 1914, a guy had an idea. He was working for the Royal Niger Company, and he had this idea. He was a British guy, by the way, of forming a country, to consolidate some of the territories that the British had gotten in the west of Africa. And long story short, he had his girlfriend whom he was about to marry, And then, he told her, find a name for this place. And they played around. It was an evening, as I like to imagine it, of romance. And, the woman said, oh, Niger area, Niger place. And then eventually came up with Nigeria. And so was it. The dalliance between these two couples created this country and decided the destiny of millions of people over multiple generations. So, of course, in the aftermath of this, then the British ruled Nigeria up until 1960. And this country that they had formed, the moment they left, the question became, what actually is this thing? What have we created? If you look at some nation states in the West, usually the normies, there's a sort of national identity. The Swedish, for instance, were already Swedes. They believed, they had, in fact, some sense of themselves. In fact, a language, and then Sweden is created. The opposite is true in a post-colonial country like Nigeria. The country is formed, and then we have to become Nigerians. So the job of trying to become Nigerian was what led to the war in 1966. People had disparate ideas about what that could actually look like. So Biafra succeeded, and then the country was thrown into war. So that same dynamic of what became like a band of brothers, there's a very good book, a historical book about the war called The Brothers' War. It's one of the most informative, actually. It was by a New York Times journalist at the time. So he saw the war actually as a brothers' war. So that's what also is replicated in the novel. Kunle goes in search of his brother, is sucked into this thing that is not his war. He knows nothing about it, in fact. And then the war gradually transforms him and his comrades.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to ask one more question and then we can turn to the audience. I was recently, I had a short fellowship in South Africa, and the group, the cohort I was with was majority scientists, and on top of it, there were a majority of evolutionary biologists. And and I know nothing about this subject, but I was so struck because I said, oh, I'll be in Nairobi and there are these novels and we're going to focus on the topic of siblings. And this guy said, oh, in evolutionary biology, that's very interesting because siblings are the only group that are born with the exact same amount of resources and are afforded the exact same amounts of opportunities and space to grow. And that's why it's the most contentious relationship. It is just bound to be messy or something, some weird evolutionary thing. And I was so struck by it. And it takes a lot to keep siblings together or connected or intense. I don't know. Do you have something to say about that? I was very struck by this comment, and then I was reading all your books, and I was struck by how resentments are born, and then they fester, and there is always a sibling that wants to choose something that is so different from what is ordained for them. Who wants to leave the fold, the one that's trying very hard to be part of the fold. It's so complicated.
Yeah, no, that is, I love that it was evolutionary biologists that brought this to the fore, because it's so true, and I think it is so messy, and I think between siblings there is something so interesting to me is the ways that we try so hard to differentiate ourselves from our siblings, and if you're a younger sibling, often you look up to your older siblings. You maybe even go through a phase where you want to be them, you want to do everything like they do, and yet there's also an age or a phase where you want to be everything that your sibling is not, and in the book, there's the three sisters, and there's the one who is the student journalist and activist, and then there's a sibling who is following a much more ordained path of going to medical school and marrying the right person and this and that, and then there's the youngest sibling who's just sort of lost and trying to figure it out, and you know, afforded more messiness maybe because she's the youngest, but also sort of left behind a little bit because she's the youngest. And yeah, I think there's just like so much potential in that they're coming from the same place, and yet they can become so different. You know, the trajectories can be so different. And I think in this novel, where there are many protagonists, I don't have one protagonist, I was really interested in that, how each character could have their own individual arc, you know, their own desires, and the ways that they see the future, and how these individual arcs all rub up against each other. And then also how the family as a unit itself also has its own arc and its own sort of desire and propulsion, forward motion, and how that maybe comes into conflict with the individual desires and freedoms.
That's great. And what your work and Chigozie's work also does wonderfully is like the ones that are left out, you know, the ones that are sort of a little like the middle ones, if you want to call them the middle kids or whoever who are, you know, there's a lot of focus on the power of the elder sibling, and there is a lot of power in that because they're sort of stand-ins for parents. But then the middle one, what are we to do? What are we to do with them? How are we to write their destinies? You know, that's also interesting. But yeah, same question for Hamza or Chigozie, whoever wants to.
Well, I think it's a question of shape for me. I think in most other types of relationships, especially the romantic type, you're trying to come together. You know, there is a disparate movement from one point to the other, and you're trying to meet at a sort of a meeting point, a centrifugal point, which is often why that is often fraught with conflicts. But I suppose that the relationship between siblings is often parallel. You know, you're moving in the same, in the same direction. So even there can be conflict when people barge into each other, but that the bond always be there because you're not trying to necessarily meet the other person. So which is, why the younger brothers in my novel, especially the narrator Benjamin, is really trying to meet with his brothers. You know, he's always playing catch up. So he doesn't understand why they are. I mean, he understands that they're older than him. They are here, but how does he catch up with them? You know, he wears their clothing. He aspires to become like them. So there's a certain form of leadership that he's trying to emulate, but at the same time, he also knows, or at least by the end of the novel, he becomes acquainted with the cost and possibilities of actually being that elder, because sometimes it doesn't go well.
Yeah.
You know.
Absolutely. Yeah, Hamza.
I think what you just said about especially siblings being born with equal resources, I think that applies to a greater extent to twins, because literally they're born into the same sort of, even the same time. And so in the book, Salima and Fahima, I think also what they're doing is they're competing on some of those resources. They're competing for their mother's affection. They're competing for the approval of the parents in general. And sometimes, we're talking about sort of the older sibling. I think it's difficult to determine which of them is the oldest one. We don't say who was born first, but I think if anybody read the book, it's clearly that Salima was born, because at least she has that kind of role of the elder sister, even in twins. And then there's one chapter where we visit their village, and so we know they have younger siblings. And at one point, I think Salima is saying, clearly there's two favorites for the mother and there's two favorites for the father, and they are perfectly fine with that sort of division. And I think maybe that competition for some of those resources, that makes it a little bit more sort of intense, or I'd say a little bit dynamic, because I think same thing, you get closer, but also you get further away. But in the case of Salima Fahim, I think also it's their sisterhood that makes them stronger. And in the title, Sunroses, sort of this whole symbol of I don't know if everybody is familiar with what the sun rose is, or like a desert rose. well,
So beautiful. You have to read the novel to learn about this thing.
I have one here, and I'll show you guys in a
Wow.
minute.
Show us.
I'll have to unwrap it, so it will take a minute. There you go.
It's like a rare diamond crystal type
It's
of
like show and tell.
evocation. I know.
Yeah, there you go.
Now Chigozie's really feeling bad. He's not here.
Wait up, Adam, there you go.
Yeah, I hope I can see clearly when he raises it up.
There you go. It's really well
Ooh
wrapped.
la
So
la.
many layers.
I know. And that's key. That's key. Part of the. All right, almost there. But really, I think
Oh my God.
what I'm saying is.
This is what he's exhibiting is the structure of a novel. Okay, narratives
yeah.
nested into one
There
another.
you go.
Voila.
Can you see this? There you go.
It's exquisite.
And so it's called a sand rose or a desert rose because it's formed in the desert, and it's formed by nature, and it's not sort of some kind of interaction between water evaporating and I think some other factors. But anyways, you find them in nature, and of course this is handmade, but it looks like a rose, and I think the whole thing in sand roses is that. The red-nailed dancers are like sand roses, which because they are daughters of the desert. They're formed by desert, but also their experience, their sisterhood, sort of makes them strong. They're beautiful like a rose, right? But they're tough. It's not going to break. It's almost like a rock. And I was going with sisterhood with that, but I think we've gone far away. Anyways, so that's what I was trying to make. I think it's sisterhood sort of makes them strong as part of also the experience and how
Yeah.
they face the reality.
Yeah.
And that was the title.
No, I love that for your novel. The other two novels are not.
I'm just gonna collect my mess right now.
I'm not thinking about sisterhood in the same way, but I love this. But I think it's time for us to take questions from the audience. So I'll open up the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My question is for Chigozie. I feel extremely honored to be able to speak to you. I've read your work and I love it. I'm currently in the middle of The Road to the Country, and I'm kind of comparing it to The Fisherman. And so pulling this theme of...
Why are you doing that?
Tell us the whole thesis. No, I'm kidding. Ask your question.
So the question that is really niggling at me actually is less about the sibling relationship. Well, maybe, but there's a certain in both novels there's a theme around the supernatural. In one book there's a seer, and in another there's a prophecy, and there's a way in which the lives of the siblings in both books kind of. So I'm in the middle of one. I have to say, so not knowing the end, how one ends, there is a way in which the lives of the siblings kind of, there's an inevitability about their lives. There's the supernatural weighing in, there's weighing in on their lives, and I wonder why that is. Do you not believe in human agency?
Wow.
It's a very interesting question.
Are their destinies written somewhere else and they're just acting out?
So the truth is that my aesthetic, if I might call it that, was shaped by just a combination of things. But one of it really is a sort of a way of telling stories from both the Igbo and the Yoruba traditions. And I'm not saying this because, I know that it's cliche. We all try to write from that. But there's something specifically that I connected with as a child. These other dimension that exist in which, so I've kind of coined a word. I'm just too lazy to write. People have been asking me, okay, try and articulate what it actually is. But I call it mystical realism. So you have a realist world as you have in The Fishermen. So these are boys who could be anywhere, New York, in Nairobi, in Abuja, living their lives. You can understand logically what they're doing. You can rationalize it. But at the same time, there is this presence of this mystical force that may or may not be ordaining their movements and lives. But you can separate that out. At the same time, you cannot. So there is a kind of a fluidity there and I think that is how my mom, for instance, that's what she believes. She would tell you if she comes in here that, look, there are spirits in this place. This was preordained, this meeting that I will meet you and these beautiful people. So there's no way that I can divorce that out of my writing. So I tried to make room for that element. You know, I know that people have called it magical realism. In fact, I had this argument with this wonderful academic guy who is writing all these papers in Denmark about my work. And I'm like, okay, point me to one element of magic in the fisherman. And he couldn't. There's no flying anything. There's no monkey, human being that's wing. There's just that spoken word that pervades the atmosphere. And that's it. So I find it in the domain of the prophetic, or something that feels like, you know, somewhat supernatural or mystical.
And for those who don't know, it is ordained in the book that there will be a conflict between the first two brothers. And things go really bad. In a way, you feel like they bring it upon themselves. Yeah. It's really, really tragic.
That's right. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Self-fulfilling thing, exactly. All right. Yeah? Right near you. Oh, she's... Oh.
Thank you. So I was just wondering, through the process of writing about siblings, especially some of you have written about siblings that you have not even had, has your perspective changed, or has anything changed for yourself? Have you discovered anything about yourself through this?
I think it's for you, Hamza. You're the one without the siblings.
Let's pretend it's gonna go.
Do you really want to be twins now?
Probably not. No, for real, probably not. But I think what that experience has pushed me to do is to be a little bit more watchful, and I think more of like observing a little bit more closely the relationships between siblings around me. And I started especially with cousins, because also I grew up, there were 4 boys and my aunt had 4 girls, and so it was always sort of like that parallel, and so that was sort of my source of like of inspiration. But also I think I had the chance to talk to a lot of people, especially like friends who read the sort of the first versions, and they commented specifically on that, and I think it challenged a lot of the sort of the concepts that I knew about, you know, about women in general, but also about those dynamic relationships. One point specifically, I think one of the beta readers once commented saying, the sister's relationship is a bit more, I don't know if she said more aggressive. No, I think she said a bit more competitive, and it's, you know, it's a bit more vicious in a way. And I wanted to challenge that. I said, okay, it can't be that simplistic, but what is it? And I think, you know, you mentioned jealousy, and we talked about a little bit about jealousy. And I can't lie, I think in the book I tried to make it a little bit more aggressive, but I couldn't go all the way out to sort of, okay, I couldn't, because I was comparing with my own relationship with my brothers, and there's things that you would never do to a sibling, you know, regardless of your gender. So I think it's those sort of conversations that were very important to me, and I think, you know, that's what it taught me a little bit about myself and also the world around me, I guess.
That's great. Yeah, there was, right next, right there.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you for this conversation. I find this topic really fascinating because, you know, it's often in literature that we found this conversation around siblings coming forth. Like I discussed with a friend recently who said there's couple therapy, individual therapy, family therapy, but no sibling therapy. And it speaks about a lack, it speaks about a shame that is often surrounding broken sibling relationships. Now, both in your works, what is also interesting is that when the father leaves in The Fisherman, or when there is a political crisis, the sibling relationship seems like the most fragile amongst all the web of relationships that exist around a person. So I just ask this question to you as writers. What did you think about this fragility, that precariousness of these sibling relationships that is so apparent, but somehow we still don't have the language. Like amongst public spaces, I don't see many people they speak about divorces and separations and heartbreak, but not broken sibling relationships.
Agreed. You're totally right. There isn't a vocabulary while there's like a million TV shows like Succession or whatever, and novels and family sagas. I think this one's, I'm going to choose who answers. That one's for Janika.
Yeah, I love this question. And I think part of that fragility that you're talking about is also because it comes from the preciousness of sibling relationships. There's something so precious and like needs protection between siblings. And especially, you know, when we're thinking about what you're talking about, like siblings breaking apart or things happening, that's often that sort of resentment or tension that's building, that's happening over so many years. And there's like all of this buried stuff, right, that just over years and years and years builds up and then maybe comes to a breaking point, maybe in adulthood. And at that point, at least in, you know, in my family, I come from a family where there are plenty of siblings that no longer speak to each other. Siblings that, you know, live in different parts of the world and don't speak, or live in the same part of the world and have had some sort of like calamity between them, and it feels irreconcilable where they can no longer be in the same room. And it blows my mind because, you know, to be raised in the same house, to share so many kinds of bond and intimacy with that person that nobody else in the world shares, and yet to not be able to, you know, recover from whatever it was. I just think, I mean, yeah, I think there should be sibling therapy, but I also think it's like, it's generational too, at least, you know, in my generation and younger generations, I think there is more of a conversation about like building and maintaining relationships and talking it out, you know, in a way that like in my parents' generation, in the, you know, earlier generations in this book, that was not, there's no language for these things, right? If tension is building over time, that conflict, it just grows and grows, and, you know, it takes such work and practice to just communicate, right? And I think that's at the root of it.
Yeah.
And so what do you mean there's no sibling therapy? It's called writing. It's for free.
Until the sibling reads the book.
I will quickly add to that and say that I also think, I mean, Janika, I agree. I also think it has to do with familiarity. You know, we often feel that we know people because we grew up with them. So once you have that much familiarity, when anything arises that might seem like any sort of mystery, it can create tension almost immediately. In fact, the fisherman was actually born out of this. You know, I come from a family that was inordinate, very large, and I used to be very ashamed of my family growing up at the time because there were, you know, about 12 kids. And we will be called all these names, battalions. So, which will embarrass me. And then by the time I went to university the first time, I left home. And I remember very well, like it was like an epiphany. All the, first year students were like calling home, oh, I'm going to talk to my friend in Lagos, this one in Port Harcourt. And it dawned on me, guy, you don't even have a friend, you know. And, you know, for the longest time, I never thought of the need of having a friend because there were so many people. No need. And then I realized that these people I used to like be ashamed of, I actually really loved them. So it was that mystery that shocked me into actually writing the book. So I think that's part of, even in romantic relationships, you feel like you know someone. So when something happens, that triggers a sort of almost a defeatist, action in you. Think about it. If you feel if you've been in a marriage for 10 years and then all of a sudden you discover that your partner has had an affair, what happens is that there's a cascade. you begin to wonder, do I even know this person? Is this 10 years a lie? You know, everything that you thought you knew crashes immediately because of that element of mystery that is introduced out of what you thought was familiar.
That's great. We'll take 2 more questions. I'm sorry. I have a 5-minute, I have my timer lady here. Yes, up here.
Hi. I wanted to ask, now that you've mentioned the concept of familiarity and you've mentioned conflict, how do you resolve conflicts within your characters, siblings or not, without the bias of yourself? You know, if you're like not the firstborn, if you're rating this as a middle child, how do you resolve conflict if your character is a firstborn?
Who wants, as Chigozie, you're the elder among the elder novelists. Do you want to take this difficult question?
Well, the thing is, each time I try to write, I discover that there's a lot to learn. That is just a fact. I'm not saying this to be modest or anything. So I don't even know much of what I do. Much of it just happens. So even though, yes, I'm a professor of creative writing, as you can imagine, my thing is just to, I think what I try to do is, you look at all 3 novels, I think of characters first, because I feel like plot, you know, in which is enshrined the idea of conflict. The plot is irrelevant. It has to be a function of character rather than the other way around. That is my personal belief. So what I do is I envision a character, a set of characters, and then I think of, okay, what is a particular character trait or behavior or emotional thing that they have that is unique to them, and then I try to take them from one end of the spectrum to the other. The fisherman, for instance, you know, you have Ike now who loves his brothers and would do anything for them, would even kill for them at the beginning of the novel. And then by the middle of the novel, his love has come to hate. In fact, he wants to kill his brothers. So how do people change? The orchestral minority is the same thing. Chinonso is a lowly poultry farmer who throws his rice chicken, self-sacrificial act at the beginning to save this woman. By the end of the novel, he's vindictive, even mad, you know. So I try to explore a sort of a movement, an evolution, psychological evolution and behavioral one, from one end of the spectrum to the other. That's really what I do. So if you call anything conflict within that, then it's just
Yeah, that's great. Did any of you want to speak to that, or should we take another question? One last question. Make it a good one. You already asked. That's not fair. Go ahead.
Hi, Lachi here. My question is, how in your writing do you challenge, for example, like Hamza had said, negative or prevalent or how do I say this? Negative stereotypes about siblinghood. How do you reinvent that or break away from the norm that, you know, how sibling relationships might look like?
Great.
I think I talked earlier about the whole thing about sort of, you know, how relationships between girls but also sisters are a bit more vicious or more competitive, and I wanted to challenge that, and I think so that's one way, so I'm not going to repeat myself. But also I think you talked about how, you know, this whole Western idea of, you know, sisters are those who sit down and talk, and Fahima and Salima very much do the opposite of that. They just throw pots at each other, and then they just go in their separate ways, and and talking about how they solve their conflict, I think I drew from my own experience with my own brothers is, if we have a fight, we just don't talk for, until we give each other space.
Silence is very helpful sometimes.
Because the alternative, because I think we grew up and when you're boys, you're always fighting and you're throwing punches, and then at one point you become too big and okay, maybe we don't want to be fighting, and so that yeah, we just maybe say a few words and then we just go separate ways and then we just move on. We never really talk it out, and that's fine. I think we're all fine with that. But I think bigger challenges of stereotypes that I've made in San Roses is, and I thought. So if you were in the previous panel, I'm sorry, I'm going to repeat that. When I was doing the research for that specific culture, I found sort of two trends. There was like a Western Orientalist, almost fetishist way of sort of describing these dancers, and it was very much like these exotic creatures, right? Very inhuman. And then there was the Algerian side, which was a more conservative. They were in denial. They were saying no, that they didn't even exist. It was the creation of the French powers, and they were trying to tarnish the pure reputation of the Algerian people. So it was very much trying to sort of hide that, and I wanted very badly to, and that's why I wrote them from point of view of dancers, not from a third point of view, because I wanted to give them again, I don't want to say give them a voice, but explore their voice in that setting. And I thought that sisterhood was really important part of that, because they have to live with a lot of other girls, and a lot of them become almost like sisters, but they have actual sisters that they live with. So that's, I think, to me, that was the bigger challenge that I tried to do.
I think just a small note I'll add on is that the way that I've tried to challenge stereotypes in my writing, not just about siblings, but sort of any stereotypes, is just specificity. I think the more specific you get in your writing, the more attention you're paying to the actual nuances of like what it really means to be a person and to be in relationship with other people. Then there's no room for stereotype, right? Because you're just looking at people and relationships head on.
Yeah. Chigozie, do you want to add or?
No, not really.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have another conversation with Chigozie tomorrow. Thank you all so much. I just wanted to say that this is interesting because all the books are dealing with same-sex siblings, and we never really touched on the brother-sister dimension, which is its own, truly another planet. But, next year. Thank you all so much for coming.